The morning sun cast long shadows across the French Quarter, glinting off polished Cadillacs, and bringing to life the ancient wrought-iron balconies of New Orleans. Inside Bayou Bistro, Christian Blake held court among his lieutenants, his black suit pristine against weathered leather. The heavy oak door burst open with such force that conversation died instantly, every guard's hand moving to concealed weapons as a small figure darted past the stunned hostess. A little boy no older than 6, tears streaming down his dirt-smudged face, stood trembling in the center of the room. "Please help! They're hurting my mom!" The child's desperate plea sliced through the room's tension, his voice breaking as his tiny chest heaved with panicked breaths. His eyes, wide with terror, locked onto Christian's with an instinctive recognition of authority. Christian rose slowly, his movement deliberate as cigarette smoke curled around his shoulders like ghostly wings. The room froze in that suspended moment, the most feared man in Louisiana staring down at a child who had just committed the unthinkable, interrupting his morning meeting. For 3 heartbeats, silence reigned as Christian's steel-gray eyes assessed the trembling child, noting the fresh bruises on his arms and the desperate hope in those innocent eyes. Something ancient and forgotten stirred behind his carefully constructed mask of indifference. "Boss?" murmured Patrick, his second in command, hand still resting on his concealed weapon, uncertainty clouding his usually confident demeanor. The question hung in the air between them, how to handle this bizarre intrusion. Christian knelt down, bringing himself eye-level with the boy who flinched, but stood his ground with courage that belied his years. "What's your name, kid?" he asked, his voice softer than any of his men had heard in years. "Charlie," the boy whispered, wiping his nose with the back of his hand, his entire body trembling like a leaf in storm. "My mom, she told me to run and not stop, and I saw your cars outside and—" His voice cracked with desperation. In that moment, Christian made a decision that would alter the course of countless lives, including his own. "Where is she, Charlie?" he asked, already motioning to Patrick, who was immediately on his feet, signaling to the others. The boy's words tumbled out in a frantic stream as he described the small yellow house 3 blocks away, where his mother was trapped with the man whose rage had finally erupted beyond closed doors. Christian caught the flash of recognition in Patrick's eyes. They knew exactly which house. "Stay with Annie," Christian instructed, nodding toward the hostess whose maternal instincts had already brought her to the boy's side with a glass of water. "Tell her to get you some pancakes while I go help your mom." The transition from restaurant to street took seconds. 4 black SUVs roaring to life, Christian sliding into the lead vehicle with a cold focus. The child's desperation had awakened something primal in their leader, something they hadn't witnessed since the early days of his empire. The convoy tore through the narrow streets, Christian's mind racing ahead to the confrontation that awaited. He had built his reputation on calculated decisions, yet here he was, racing toward unknown danger because a child's tears had penetrated his defenses. "The yellow house with the broken gate," Christian murmured as they turned onto Dauphine Street, his eyes narrowing at the seemingly peaceful facade that concealed violence within. "Patrick, you and Cole take the back. Nobody leaves that way," he commanded. At that moment, a scream pierced the morning air, high, terrified, and abruptly cut short. Christian was out of the vehicle before it fully stopped, his usual calculated demeanor replaced by a cold fury that propelled him toward the peeling front door. Christian Blake had not become the king of New Orleans' underworld through mercy or hesitation. His rise had been meteoric and brutal. At 29, he controlled everything from the docks to the high-end casinos, his name spoken in whispers even among police. His empire stretched from the Mississippi to the swamplands, built on a foundation of loyalty purchased through both fear and protection. The Blake Syndicate was known for its code. Betrayal meant death, but loyalty meant prosperity beyond imagination. The sprawling mansion in the Garden District where Christian resided alone was a testament to his success. Marble floors imported from Italy, artwork worth millions adorning walls. Yet for all its grandeur, it remained as cold and empty as its owner's heart. What few knew about Christian Blake was that he had crawled from the gutters himself, orphaned at 12, surviving on streets that devoured weaker children. The scars on his body told stories of lessons learned through blood and pain. His lieutenants, Patrick, Cole, and the others, were not merely employees, but the closest thing to family Christian had allowed himself since watching his mother die. They followed him not just from fear, but from a grudging respect for a man who never asked for more than he himself would give. Women came and went in Christian's life, beautiful, sophisticated companions who adorned his arm at galas and warmed his bed at night. None had ever penetrated the armor he'd built around himself, the protective fortress that kept emotion at bay. Power was Christian's true companion. The rush of controlling his domain, of building something from nothing, of being feared and respected. It was enough, he told himself in the quiet hours when sleep eluded him and memories threatened. Yet something had shifted when he looked into Charlie's desperate eyes, a recognition perhaps of his own childhood terror reflected back at him. The boy had awakened something Christian thought long buried beneath years of calculated violence and control. The yellow house they now approached belonged to one of his lower-level distributors, a man named Hank Porter, who moved product through the riverside bars. Christian had never met the man's family, had never cared to know about the lives that orbited around his business transactions. But now, as his shoes hit the cracked sidewalk and he heard another muffled cry from within the house, Christian felt something unfamiliar unfurling in his chest. It felt dangerously close to responsibility for something beyond his empire. 3 minutes, he told his men as they formed around him, weapons now visible in the morning light. If I'm not out in 3 minutes with the woman, burn this place to the ground with everyone inside it. The weight of his own gun was familiar in his hand as he approached the door, the golden morning light catching on its polished surface. Christian had killed before, clinically necessarily without hesitation, but never with the white-hot rage now coursing through his veins. His foot connected with the door with such force that it splintered on impact, the crash echoing through the small house like a thunderclap. Christian stepped through the debris, his tall frame filling the doorway as his eyes adjusted to the dimmer interior. What he saw inside burned itself permanently into his memory, a tableau of violence frozen in the moment of his arrival. A woman with copper hair lay crumpled against the far wall, a thin trickle of blood running from her temple down a face that, even in pain, held striking beauty. The man standing over her turned at Christian's entrance, confusion replacing rage, as he recognized one of the most dangerous men in New Orleans standing in his broken doorway. "Boss?" "What?" he began, alcohol heavy on his breath even at this early hour. "The boy found me," Christian said simply, his voice deceptively soft as he stepped fully into the room, taking in every detail, the overturned furniture, the shattered glass, the bruises already forming on the woman's exposed arms. "He made a better choice than you did." The woman's eyes fluttered open at his voice, revealing irises the color of summer storms, gray with flecks of blue that widened in confusion and fear at the sight of the armed men filling her small living room. She tried to speak, but only managed a pained gasp. "Christian Blake," she whispered, recognition dawning in those storm cloud eyes, her body instinctively pressing further against the wall, as if trying to disappear into it. The fear in her gaze was different from what he usually saw, not fear of the unknown, but fear of knowing exactly who stood before her. Hank Porter's face drained of color as he processed the situation, sobriety slicing through his drunken haze with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "This is a family matter, Mr. Blake," he stammered, taking a step back, hands raising in placation. "My wife and I were just having a disagreement." Christian's laugh held no humor as he moved further into the room, each step deliberate, predatory. "When my business associates make poor decisions in their professional lives, I terminate our relationship," he said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. The woman, Charlie's mother, watched this exchange with growing horror, her gaze darting between the two men and toward the door, as if calculating her chances of escape. Blood matted her copper hair where it had been slammed against the wall. "Your son is safe," Christian told her directly, ignoring Porter's continued excuses. "He's at my restaurant eating pancakes with my staff, showing more courage than this piece of garbage has in his entire body." Her relief was palpable, tears welling in those remarkable eyes as she nodded once, a silent thank you that somehow carried more weight than any spoken gratitude Christian had ever received. In that moment, something indefinable shifted between them. "Samantha deserved it," Porter spat suddenly, alcohol and fear creating a volatile cocktail of poor judgment, always threatening to leave, to take my boy away from me, as if she could survive a day without what I provide. The transformation in Christian was instantaneous, the controlled businessman vanishing as he crossed the room in 2 strides, his hand closing around Porter's throat with crushing force. "Her name sounds wrong coming from your mouth," he growled, lifting the man until his feet barely touched the floor. "Please," Samantha's voice cut through the tension, stronger now despite her injuries. "Not in front of Charlie," she pleaded, looking toward the doorway with fear in her eyes. Before realizing her son wasn't there, Christian released Porter with a disgusted shove, watching him crumple to the floor, gasping for breath. "Pack whatever you need," he told Samantha, his tone brooking no argument. "You and your son are coming with me." Her hesitation was brief, but noticeable. The devil she knew versus the devil she didn't. But the thought of Charlie seemed to decide her. She rose shakily to her feet, dignity somehow intact, despite her torn dress and bruised skin. "If you touch her again, if you attempt to contact her or the boy, if you so much as speak their names," Christian addressed Porter in a voice like winter frost, "what happens to you will become a cautionary tale whispered throughout this city for generations." As Samantha gathered a few belongings with trembling hands, Christian watched her with a curiosity he couldn't explain. She moved with a grace that transcended her circumstances, a resilience that spoke of years enduring what no one should have to endure. Patrick opened the car door as Christian approached with Samantha, leaning slightly against his arm, her small suitcase clutched in her free hand. The lieutenant's face remained impassive, but his eyes held questions about this unprecedented deviation from their normal operations. "We'll go directly to the estate," Christian instructed as he helped Samantha into the vehicle, noting how she winced when her back touched the leather seat. "Call Dr. Hammond and have him meet us there within the hour." The journey through New Orleans passed in tense silence, Samantha staring out the window at the city transforming from the working-class neighborhoods to the opulent garden district. Her face reflected in the tinted glass showed a woman struggling to process the sudden upheaval of her world. Christian studied her covertly during the drive, the quiet dignity in her posture despite obvious pain, the protective way she clutched the small bag containing the only possessions she deemed worth saving. No wedding ring adorned her finger, he noticed, though her skin bore the telltale mark of one recently removed. The Blake estate emerged from behind ornate iron gates that opened automatically as their convoy approached, revealing manicured gardens surrounding a colonial mansion that spoke of old money and power. Samantha's sharp intake of breath was the only indication of her surprise at the grandeur. "Charlie is already here," Christian informed her as the car came to a stop at the grand entrance. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Bennett, has been keeping him entertained in the kitchen. Apparently he's quite fond of chocolate chip cookies." Relief softened Samantha's features momentarily before wariness returned, her storm cloud eyes meeting Christian's directly for the first time. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying neither accusation nor gratitude, merely a genuine desire to understand. The question caught Christian off guard. Straightforward inquiries about his motives were rare in his world of calculated moves and countermoves. "Your son showed extraordinary courage coming to find help," he answered simply, offering his hand to help her from the car. Charlie's excited cry of, "Mom!" cut through the formal atmosphere as they entered the marble foyer, the boy running from the direction of the kitchen with chocolate smeared across one cheek. He stopped short at the sight of his mother's injuries, his small face crumpling with a mixture of relief and renewed distress. Samantha dropped to her knees despite the pain it clearly caused her, gathering her son into a fierce embrace that spoke volumes about their bond. "You were so brave, my little knight," she whispered into his hair, tears finally breaking through her composed exterior. Christian watched this reunion with an unfamiliar tightness in his chest, suddenly feeling like an intruder in his own home. He signaled silently to Mrs. Bennett, who appeared discreetly in a doorway, her kind face showing concern but not judgment at the scene before her. "Please show Mrs. Porter and Charlie to the East Wing guest suite," he instructed, deliberately using the formal title despite knowing from Samantha's earlier reaction that she likely didn't consider herself married anymore. "Dr. Hammond will be arriving shortly to check on our guests." Charlie looked up at Christian with those same brave eyes that had captured his attention in the restaurant, though now they held something new, a child's simple trust that pierced through layers of hardened cynicism. "You saved my mom, just like you said you would," he stated with absolute certainty. Samantha rose shakily, keeping her son close against her side as she faced Christian. "We can't stay here," she said softly, though the statement lacked conviction, as her eyes darted toward the impressive staircase that led to security she hadn't known in years. "You can and you will, at least until we determine your next steps," Christian replied, his tone leaving no room for argument, though his words were carefully chosen. "Your safety is now my concern, whether that fits into your plans or not." Dr. Hammond's examination revealed the extent of Samantha's injuries: 3 cracked ribs, a mild concussion, and numerous contusions in various stages of healing that told a story of ongoing abuse. His grim expression as he exited the guest room spoke volumes to Christian, who waited in the hallway. "This isn't the first time she's been hurt, and some injuries never properly healed," the doctor reported quietly, packing away his equipment with methodical precision. "She needs rest, proper nutrition, and time away from whoever did this to her." Christian nodded, a muscle working in his jaw as he processed this information. "She'll have everything she needs here," he assured the doctor, already mentally cataloging the resources required to ensure both mother and son could recover without worry. Later that evening, after Charlie had fallen asleep in the adjoining room of their suite, Christian found Samantha standing on the private balcony, overlooking the illuminated gardens. Fresh bruises bloomed against her pale skin, contrasting sharply with the elegant silk robe Mrs. Bennet had provided. "Porter wasn't just my distributor," Christian stated without preamble, watching how Samantha's shoulders tensed at the mention of her abuser. "He also had connections to rival organizations that have been encroaching on my territory, connections he kept hidden from me." She turned slowly, moonlight casting her features in silver and shadow. "Is that why you intervened?" she asked, no accusation in her tone, merely a woman seeking to understand her current circumstances. "Because he betrayed your business interests?" Christian considered lying. It would be simpler, cleaner, maintaining the emotional distance he preferred. But something in those storm cloud eyes demanded honesty. "I intervened because your son reminded me of someone I once knew," he admitted, surprising himself with the truth. Samantha nodded slowly, accepting this answer as she wrapped her arms around herself in a protective gesture. "Charlie has always seen the best in people, even when there's little good to find," she said softly, her gaze returning to the moonlit garden. "How did you know who I was?" Christian asked, recalling her recognition when he'd entered her home. "Most people in this city know my name, but few would recognize my face immediately." A bitter smile touched her lips briefly as she traced a pattern on the stone balustrade. "Before Charlie, I worked as a paralegal for Westbrook and Associates. They handled several cases involving businesses that paid protection to your organization," she explained. This revelation surprised Christian. Westbrook was one of the most prestigious law firms in Louisiana, representing wealthy clients and corporate interests. "That's quite a fall from paralegal to—" He trailed off, unwilling to put into words the situation he'd found her in. "To battered wife of a low-level drug dealer?" Samantha finished for him, a spark of defiance flaring through her exhaustion. Porter was a client at the firm, charming, attentive, everything a lonely single mother thought she wanted in a partner. The pieces began to align in Christian's mind as he leaned against the doorframe, keeping a respectful distance. "He targeted you for your access to information about our operations," he concluded, watching her face carefully for confirmation. Samantha nodded, tears gathering but not falling. "By the time I realized what he was doing, he had isolated me completely from friends and colleagues, convinced my former boss I was stealing client information," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "When did the abuse begin?" Christian asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Men like Porter followed predictable patterns: charm, isolation, control, and finally violence when other methods of domination proved insufficient. "The first time he hit me was the day I tried to leave with Charlie," she answered, one hand unconsciously rising to her cheekbone where a faded scar was barely visible beneath her makeup. "He made it clear that if I ever tried again, he would take Charlie from me permanently." Christian felt cold fury rise within him at this confirmation, but kept his expression neutral. "And the rival organization he was feeding information to?" he prompted, needing to understand all dimensions of this situation that had so unexpectedly entangled with his own. "The Cardona family from Miami," Samantha revealed, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper as if the name itself might summon danger. "I found correspondence. They're planning something big, using Porter as their entry point into New Orleans." Days stretched into weeks at the Blake estate, spring blossoming across the gardens as Samantha's visible wounds began to heal. Charlie adapted to their new environment with the resilience of childhood, quickly becoming a favorite among the staff, who had never heard childish laughter echo through the austere halls. Christian found himself increasingly drawn to the East Wing where his unlikely guests resided, initially justifying these visits as security briefings about the Cardona threat. Samantha's insights into Porter's connections proved invaluable, her analytical mind impressing even Patrick, who rarely approved of civilian involvement. The first time Christian heard Samantha laugh, a genuine sound of amusement when Charlie demonstrated his newly acquired skill of balancing spoons on his nose at breakfast, something shifted irreversibly in his carefully constructed worldview. The sound lingered in his mind throughout meetings with distributors and negotiations with city officials. "You never told me what happened to him," Samantha said one evening as they sat in the library, Charlie already asleep upstairs after exhausting himself in the garden. The question needed no clarification. They both knew she meant Porter. Christian considered his response carefully, watching the firelight play across her features that had filled out slightly now that she was eating regularly. "He's no longer in New Orleans," he answered truthfully, if incompletely. "His connection to the Cardonas earned him a one-way trip out of my territory." Samantha studied him over the rim of her wine glass, those perceptive eyes seeming to read between his carefully chosen words. "I should feel something about that. Fear, guilt, satisfaction. But I feel nothing except relief that he can't find us," she confessed. "The capacity to feel nothing for those who've hurt you is a survival skill," Christian responded, thinking of his own emotional detachment that had served him well over years of building his empire. Some would call it a strength. The subtle shake of her head surprised him as she set down her glass. "It's not strength when it extends to everyone, when you can't feel anything at all for anyone," she countered softly, her insight cutting closer to his reality than he'd expected. Over the following days, Christian found himself sharing meals with Samantha and Charlie with increasing frequency, his schedule mysteriously clearing around dinner time despite Patrick's raised eyebrows. The boys' endless questions about everything from how cars worked to why the sky was blue provided a strange reprieve from the calculated conversations that filled Christian's normal days. "You never had children," Samantha observed one afternoon as they watched Charlie exploring the garden under Mrs. Bennet's watchful eye. It wasn't a question, but an observation, delivered without judgment as they sat beneath the shade of a massive oak tree. Christian's laugh held little humor as he loosened his tie, a rare concession to informality. "My lifestyle doesn't lend itself to family life," he replied, the standard answer he gave to anyone who dared broach the subject of his solitary existence. "And yet you've created this fortress where people are fiercely loyal to you," she countered, her gaze still following her son's adventures among the rose bushes. "That's a kind of family, even if you don't call it that." The observation lingered between them, neither uncomfortable nor easily dismissed. "Loyalty built on fear and financial dependence isn't family," Christian finally responded, surprised by his own candor. "It's business wrapped in convenient terminology." Samantha turned to face him fully then, challenge evident in her expression. "Is that why you've kept us here?" "Business," she asked directly, no accusation in her tone, but a simple demand for honesty that few would dare present to Christian Blake. Before he could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal too much of his own confusion about their presence, Charlie came bounding up the gentle slope toward them, clutching something in his small hands. "Mr. Christian, look what I found," he exclaimed, excitement radiating from his entire being. Christian leaned forward as the boy opened his cupped hands to reveal a tiny, brilliantly blue butterfly resting on his palm. "It's a blue morpho," Christian identified automatically, surprising both himself and Samantha with this unexpected knowledge. "They're not native to Louisiana. It must have escaped from the botanical gardens." "It's the exact same color as your eyes," Charlie announced to his mother with the certainty of childhood, transferring the delicate creature to Samantha's outstretched hand. The butterfly's wings pulsed slowly, iridescent blue, catching the dappled sunlight filtering through the oak leaves. The butterfly moment beneath the oak tree marked a turning point, a brief interlude of genuine connection that Christian found himself unwilling to dismiss as meaningless. That night, he reviewed security footage from the estate perimeter with unusual personal attention, the threat from the Cardona family suddenly feeling more immediate. Patrick arrived at dawn with news that confirmed Christian's growing unease. "Our sources confirm Cardona's eldest son, Ricardo, arrived in New Orleans last night," he reported, placing surveillance photos on Christian's desk showing a sleek private jet at the regional airport. Christian studied the images with narrowed eyes, mentally calculating the implications of Ricardo's personal involvement. He wouldn't come himself unless they were ready to move, he mused, tapping one finger against the polished mahogany surface. "There's more," Patrick continued, sliding forward another photograph, this one showing Hank Porter leaving the terminal with Ricardo, his face partially obscured by sunglasses but unmistakable to those who knew him. "Apparently, your mercy was misplaced. The boy starts school next week," Patrick reminded him with uncharacteristic gentleness. "We can't keep them in protective custody forever without explaining why. She deserves to know the full scope of the danger." That evening, after Charlie had been tucked into bed with stories of pirates and treasure, Christian invited Samantha to his private study. The room, with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and leather furnishings, reflected the man himself, organized, intimidating, yet hiding unexpected depths. "Porter is back in New Orleans," Christian stated without preamble as he poured 2 glasses of bourbon, watching Samantha's face pale at the news. "He's working directly with Ricardo Cardona now, which elevates the threat significantly." She accepted the drink with steady hands despite the fear evident in her eyes. "They know I'm here," she concluded, her quick mind connecting the implications immediately. "They know what information I have about their operations." Christian nodded, respecting her enough not to soften the truth. "The Cardonas want to eliminate me and take control of New Orleans. Porter wants revenge on both of us, and he knows Charlie is your vulnerability," he explained, laying out the situation with brutal clarity. "We should leave," Samantha said immediately, setting down her untouched drink. "Your involvement with us has put you in their crosshairs even more directly. We're a liability you never asked for." Christian moved around his desk to stand before her, close enough to see the faint freckles across her nose that had emerged during their afternoons in the garden. "You became my responsibility the moment Charlie walked into my restaurant," he stated with quiet intensity. Something shifted in Christian's expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of a spirit as fiercely independent as his own. "Then be my ally instead," he proposed, the words emerging before he'd fully formed the thought. "Help me dismantle the Cardona threat permanently." Surprise flickered across Samantha's features, followed by cautious interest. "What exactly are you suggesting?" she asked, studying him with the analytical mind that had made her a valued paralegal before Porter had systematically dismantled her career. "You have insider knowledge about Porter's connection to the Cardonas, legal training, and a perspective my organization lacks," Christian explained, warming to the idea as he spoke. "Together, we can create a strategy they won't expect from a man they believe operates solely through force." Samantha considered this proposition, conflict evident in her expression. "And Charlie?" she asked, her primary concern never wavering regardless of the circumstances. "He deserves a normal life, not one surrounded by danger and criminal enterprises. Charlie deserves to grow up safe, with a mother who isn't looking over her shoulder for the rest of her life," Christian countered gently. "Helping me means ensuring that future for both of you. One decisive action instead of a lifetime of running." The truth of his words registered in her eyes as Samantha rose from her chair, moving to the window that overlooked the moonlit garden, where earlier that day, her son had played without fear for the first time in years. "What's your plan?" she asked finally, her decision evident in those 3 simple words. Christian felt an unfamiliar sensation expand in his chest, not the cold satisfaction of a business deal secured, but something warmer and more complex. "We'll use the Cardona's expectations against them," he began, already mentally assembling the pieces of a strategy unlike any he'd employed before. The trap was set with precision that reflected both Christian's tactical experience and Samantha's meticulous attention to detail. The abandoned warehouse on the riverfront had once served as a transfer point for Christian's organization, but had been strategically leaked as his current base of operations. Ricardo Cardona prided himself on personal involvement in major territory expansions, a trait that made him both respected and predictable to those who understood the patterns of ambitious men. The surveillance team confirmed his arrival at the meeting point, Porter at his side like an eager shadow. "Remember, we only need the electronic evidence from Porter's phone," Christian reminded Samantha, as they reviewed the operation from the secure command center he'd established 3 blocks away. "Once we have that, the FBI will handle the Cardonas using the RICO case your former firm was building." Samantha nodded, her focus absolute, as she monitored the surveillance feeds showing Ricardo's men taking positions around the warehouse perimeter. "Porter keeps everything on his encrypted phone. Emails, bank transfers, meeting recordings," she confirmed, her knowledge of her abuser's habits now a powerful weapon. The operation unfolded with practiced efficiency. Ricardo and his lieutenants entered the warehouse expecting to ambush Christian, only to find federal agents emerging from concealed positions. The chaos that erupted was calculated and controlled, each element unfolding according to the carefully orchestrated plan. "Porter is trying to escape through the east exit," Samantha reported suddenly, her attention fixed on a monitor showing a solitary figure breaking away from the main confrontation. "He's not with the main group being detained." Christian was moving before she finished speaking, Patrick already calling in the secondary team to cut off Porter's escape route. "Stay here," Christian ordered Samantha, the the command softened by the quick touch of his hand against hers. This ends tonight. The alleyway behind the warehouse lay in deep shadow, the sounds of the federal raid muffled by distance, and the constant hum of the nearby river. Christian moved silently, years of surviving New Orleans streets guiding his steps as he tracked his prey through the darkness. Porter's ragged breathing gave away his position before visual confirmation. The man was hunched behind a dumpster, frantically typing on his phone with trembling fingers. "Deleting evidence won't save you," Christian stated calmly, stepping into view with his weapon held casually at his side. Terror flashed across Porter's face as he scrambled to his feet, the phone clutched against his chest like a shield. "Blake," he gasped, eyes darting for escape routes that didn't exist. "This isn't what it looks like. I was forced to work with them." "You seem to be forced into a lot of situations," Christian observed coldly, advancing with measured steps. "Forced to betray me, forced to work with Cardona, forced to beat your wife when she discovered what you were doing." Porter's expression shifted from fear to desperation, the cornered animal ready to lash out with anything available. "She was mine before you took her," he snarled, something unhinged flickering behind his eyes. "Everything was fine until that brat ran to you." The mention of Charlie ignited Christian's fury, though his exterior remained chillingly calm. "Give me the phone, Porter," he demanded, extending his hand with the absolute certainty of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Your only choice now is how this ends for you." For a moment, it seemed Porter might comply, his survival instinct briefly overriding his rage, but then his expression hardened with the special hatred of a man with nothing left to lose. "You want the phone?" he taunted, pulling a small revolver from his jacket pocket. "Come take it." What happened next unfolded in heartbeats. Porter raising his weapon, a shot echoing through the alleyway, and Porter crumpling to the ground clutching his shoulder. Behind Christian stood Samantha, her hands steady on the pistol Patrick had apparently provided for her protection. "I told you to stay at the command center," Christian said quietly as he approached her, noting the perfect stance that spoke of someone who had prepared for this moment. Her eyes remained fixed on Porter's writhing form, no hint of regret or hesitation in their stormy depths. "You don't get to order me around, remember?" she replied, her voice remarkably steady as she lowered the weapon. "Partners make decisions together, and I decided I wasn't letting him take another shot at my future." The federal agents arrived moments later, securing Porter and retrieving the phone that contained everything needed to dismantle the Cardona organization's expansion plans. As they led him away, Porter's venomous gaze fixed on Samantha with undisguised hatred. "This isn't over," he spat, blood staining his expensive shirt. Christian stepped between them, shielding Samantha from those hate-filled eyes. "It was over the moment you underestimated her," he stated with quiet finality, watching as the federal agents pushed Porter into a waiting vehicle that would take him far from New Orleans. 3 months after the warehouse operation, the Cardona organization had been effectively dismantled through a combination of federal prosecution and strategic pressure from Christian's syndicate. Ricardo faced multiple life sentences, while Porter had turned state's witness in a desperate attempt to reduce his own sentence. Samantha stood on the balcony of what was now officially her suite in the East Wing, watching Charlie chase fireflies across the twilight garden with Mrs. Bennett's grandchildren who visited every Sunday. The sound of his carefree laughter still felt like a miracle after years of enforced silence in Porter's house. "The prosecutors called today," Christian announced as he joined her, loosening his tie after a day of meetings that increasingly focused on legitimate business ventures rather than his traditional operations. Porter's testimony secured convictions for the entire Cardona leadership. "I've been thinking about Charlie's education," Christian ventured after a comfortable silence, watching the children below construct an elaborate fortress from garden furniture and blankets. "The Academy on St. Charles has an excellent reputation and discreet security protocols." A small smile played at the corners of Samantha's mouth as she turned to face him. "You've already arranged it, haven't you?" she asked knowingly, having grown accustomed to Christian's tendency to solve problems before they were even fully articulated. "I may have had a preliminary discussion with the headmaster," he admitted with the faintest hint of sheepishness that only she ever witnessed. "But the final decision is yours, as always." The "as always" hung between them, an acknowledgement of the careful boundaries they had established, the respect for autonomy that formed the foundation of whatever this was becoming. "Thank you for consulting me this time," Samantha replied, genuine appreciation warming her voice. Below in the garden, Charlie had apparently declared himself king of the fortress, a paper crown crafted by Mrs. Bennett perched jauntily on his dark curls. "He's healing," Samantha observed softly, maternal pride evident in every line of her face. The nightmares are less frequent now. Christian nodded, remembering the early weeks when Charlie's terrified screams had echoed through the mansion at 3 a.m, bringing both of them running to comfort the boy who feared his father had returned. Children are remarkably resilient when given safety and stability. And what about their mothers? Samantha asked, turning to face Christian fully, the question layered with meanings neither of them had dared to directly address in the months following the warehouse confrontation. Are they resilient too? Christian studied her face in the fading light, the strength that had drawn him from the beginning, now complemented by a confidence that came from reclaiming her own power. I think they're the most resilient of all, he answered honestly, allowing himself to truly see her. Samantha set down her wine glass, her movements deliberate as she closed the distance between them. I've made a decision, she stated, the directness that he had come to appreciate evident in her tone. About our arrangement here. Christian felt an uncharacteristic moment of uncertainty. The possibility that she might leave now that the threat was eliminated had haunted him more than he cared to admit. Whatever you need, it's yours, he offered, the words emerging more vulnerable than intended. What I need, she began, her storm cloud eyes holding his with unwavering intensity, is to stop pretending that what's between us is merely convenient or strategic or temporary. The admission hung in the air between them, neither a question nor a demand, but a simple truth finally acknowledged. Samantha, Christian breathed her name like something precious, his carefully maintained control wavering for perhaps the first time in his adult life. I'm not asking for promises or declarations, she continued, her practical nature asserting itself even in this moment of emotional honesty. I'm simply acknowledging what's already here, something neither of us planned but both of us built, day by day. Christian reached for her then, his touch gentle as he traced the line of her jaw with fingers that had ordered deaths and built empires, but now trembled slightly at this far more consequential contact. I've never been good at naming what matters to me, he admitted quietly. Then don't name it, Samantha suggested, leaning into his touch with the trust that had been earned through actions rather than words. Just show me, as you've been doing since the day you broke down Porter's door. When their lips finally met, it felt like the inevitable conclusion to a story that had begun with a desperate child running into a restaurant, and the unlikeliest of heroes rising to answer the call. The kiss deepened with months of unspoken longing, finally finding expression. Below in the garden, Charlie looked up at the balcony and nudged Mrs. Bennett, pointing with the innocent perception of childhood at the two figures silhouetted against the warm light from within. The older woman smiled knowingly, ushering the children inside with promises of ice cream to give the adults their moment of privacy. Later that night, after Charlie had been tucked in with stories and kisses, Christian and Samantha sat in the library discussing the future, not with grand declarations or dramatic promises, but with the practical considerations of two people who had survived enough to value substance over sentiment. The legitimate businesses need expansion, Christian mused, Samantha's head resting comfortably against his shoulder as they shared the oversized leather chair. There's potential in the tech sector that we haven't explored yet. Samantha hummed thoughtfully, her legal mind already connecting possibilities. I've been reviewing the portfolio. With my paralegal background, I could help restructure the holdings to create more separation between your various interests, she suggested. Every great family started somewhere, Samantha replied with quiet wisdom, her hand finding his in the comfortable space between them. Even the Medicis began as merchants before becoming patrons and powers. The comparison sparked something in Christian's imagination, a legacy beyond power and fear, perhaps something that Charlie could one day inherit without shame. Partners in all things, then? He proposed, the question carrying weight beyond business arrangements. Samantha turned to face him, the firelight catching the copper highlights in her hair and the certainty in her eyes. Partners in all things, she agreed, sealing the pact with a kiss that promised beginnings rather than endings. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, as your support is crucial for me to continue creating content here.